Okay, today we're going to do chapter 11, lesson 2, all about Rome as a republic. So, first of all, talking about social classes like we do with every chapter. In Rome, like you won't be surprised to hear, the wealthy, in this case, they're wealthy landowners, and they're the oldest and most prominent families. They are the ruling class, and they were called patricians. And the ordinary citizens, like everyone else, the artisans, shopkeepers, small farm owners, people like that, were called plebeians. Okay. And in this society, both of the social classes were citizens. The men had the right to vote. Both had to pay taxes. Both were required to be in the army. Men, that is, right, can vote. But plebeians were considered, beneath the patricians, and there were certain rules socially. So, like, you couldn't marry outside of your class. Plebeians couldn't hold public office. They weren't even, eligible, or do any other jobs that were considered, important, like leading public ceremonies for the gods. Okay. So that's just how it was. And therefore, the government is run, at least at first, by the patricians. Now, you will see a lot of similarities. We get a lot of our American government from the Romans. So they had 3 branches of government, just like we do, executive, judicial, and legislative. They didn't call it that, but that's, what it is. And they had even a system of checks and balances, right, to make sure one group doesn't get all the power. But they don't have separation of powers. So in Rome, the same people who made the laws, there's no, you could do more than one thing. So, for instance, there were judges who helped run the government and lead armies too. Okay, so there's a overlap in duties. All right, so the 3 branches. So basically, the executive branch, which they didn't really call that, but the people who are running the government, there are 2 leaders called consuls, and the consuls were, of course, patricians. They were administrators and army leaders. They only let them serve for 1 year because they didn't want them to get too powerful. And since there were 2 of them, they could each veto or reject the other person's decision. Veto literally in Latin means I forbid. Okay, so this is, you will see a lot of similarities with things that we've picked up in our system of government. The judicial side, there were judges that were called praetors, and praetors were, the judges basically interpreting the laws, and they also, though, could lead armies, right? So there was that overlap. The legislative branch, the lawmakers, right? There's actually 2 groups. There was the Senate, was a group of 300 men, of course, all patricians, and they were serving for life, okay? And then there was also the Assembly of Centuries, which was a group where they had some different powers. They also, of course, are going to be patricians, and they elected the consuls and the praetors and passed laws. Early on, the Senate was kind of just more of like an advisor for the consuls, but later on, by around the 200s-ish, they were doing more like debating foreign policy and proposing laws and approving spending on construction projects, things like that. Okay. So the plebeians, as you can imagine, are going to get frustrated because they do not have any say at all in the government, even though they are citizens and they have to pay taxes and they have this requirement to serve in the army. They actually have no say at all in how the government is run. So eventually they get fed up, and in 494, the plebeians decide to go on strike They refuse to fight in the army. In fact, they leave Rome and they say they're going to go start their own government. And of course, the patricians are smart. They realize that with this large of a group of their society leaving, that would basically make their republic collapse. So they compromise and they say, okay, we'll give you a part of the government called the Council of the Plebs, and you can elect your own officials. So those officials were called tribunes, and that way those people would be looking out for the ordinary citizens' rights. Okay, so they would voice the plebeians' concerns. They could have some veto powers, and then as time goes on, they even kind of expand some of their powers. Some of them even become consuls. You see that the plebeians also can start marrying, so they got rid of that rule that you couldn't marry. So, over time they fight for more rights, and things kind of change. And in fact, the Council of the Plebs even gets, more power for themselves eventually, that they are not just making rules and things for the plebeians, but for all Roman citizens. Okay. Interesting thing about the Roman government, because they have two consuls, right, and then that can veto each other, they realize that there are some times that having that system could not be good if it's like an emergency, a crisis. So they had the idea that there might be times that they need to have only one person in power who could make decisions quickly. And so they had the position of dictator, that they would let someone have the full power, but the idea was that they were supposed to use it just while they were in this crisis mode, and then they would voluntarily give it up. And they held up Cincinnatus as the, story of the perfect example of doing your civic duty, meaning, right, it's your job to help out your country. So the story goes that he was a retired consul who was really well respected, and he was there was a crisis where an enemy was threatening Rome, and they're afraid that Rome's going to get destroyed, and they need someone to, lead their army and solve this. So they go to Cincinnatus out in his fields, and they say, we want you to be dictator. So he goes and he, leads the army, and then within a couple weeks, he is able to solve this problem, right? They defeat the army, and then he resigns as dictator, 2 weeks, a little bit more, and then he goes back to his fields. And so they're held that up as like the perfect example. And there's stories about George Washington looked really up to Cincinnatus, and he was also a farmer who was asked to lead an army, and the Continental Army, right? And then they win the War of Independence, and then he wants to go back to his fields, but they say, oh no, now we need you to be president, right? And the story goes that he really didn't want to be, but he felt like the civic duty, and so he did it, and then he got out of there as soon as he could, right? So anyway, so there's that story of Cincinnatus, and yes, Cincinnati, the city, is named after Cincinnatus. So laws. Okay, so originally the laws were not written down anywhere, and the plebeians were complaining that they thought that the patrician judges would just rule in favor of other patricians, right? And so they demanded that the laws be written down. So they were called the 12 tables, because and they were written out on 12 bronze tablets, and they were placed in the forum, which is the marketplace, and they were placed out there for everyone to see. And so the idea is that then the judges would have this guidelines to go by, and it couldn't be, as biased, and that everyone was supposed to be treated equally. And then that idea actually expands as Rome is conquering all these new nations. and have all these different people. Remember, we talked about that last time, how they had, you know, awarded rights to people who were conquered. Well, they extended the 12 tables, and they call it now the this new rules and rights and laws for people who are not the full citizens in Rome, but those outside places. That was called the Law of Nations. Okay, where they were saying that you deserve to have some rights protected and things too. All right, so a lot of our justice system, American justice system today, you will see here in Rome. So the idea, for example, that you're innocent until proven guilty, that was from the Romans. That if you're accused, you have the right to defend yourself before a judge. That judges must carefully consider all of the evidence before making a decision. And something that's very important called the rule of law that shows up in a lot of different countries, that the laws apply to everyone equally and everyone should be treated equally under the law. Okay, that was a Roman idea that was kind of new and spread before this, or in other places. You know, the upper class would have certain privileges. They had their different courts than the lower class, and they had different rights, or the lower might not have any rights at all. And so they were trying to make it more equal for everyone. That picture, by the way, is the goddess of justice, Roman goddess in mythology. And that symbol, you know, the reason she's blindfolded is showing that she's going to be objective, right? Okay, the Punic Wars. So the Punic Wars are a series of 3 wars over about 120 years between Rome and Carthage. So Rome is growing bigger, wealthier, right? And they are threatened by Carthage. Carthage is a very powerful trading empire along the coast of North Africa. And they have their beginnings back from the Phoenicians, and they're very wealthy and powerful and in that area, and of course in also in Southern Europe. And so they're basically Rome's major rival. So they Rome wants to go after, they're both going after, I should say, Sicily. Carthage already has a colony there, and so when Rome starts to go after Sicily, that island is the island off the boot, right? Carthage doesn't like it, and they want to defend it. Okay, so they get into a war. So Rome has a great army, but they have no navy, and so they have to quickly make one. And one of the smart things they did is they modeled it after the Carthaginian ships. However, they added something new, small movable bridge that could be put out at the top, at the front of the ship. And the reason they did that is because basically, remember, they're really good army soldiers, right? So when they put the bridge across, as you can see in the picture, they're now making a naval fight into an army fight, right? That they can fight hand to hand, making it more like a land war instead of a sea war. So that was a smart advantage that they came up with. To make a long story short, for about 20 years, they have a series of different battles, and in the end, Carthage is defeated, and they give up, and they say, fine, you can have Sicily. And they also pay a huge fine to the Romans, so they'll stop fighting, and Rome gets the island of Sicily. But they're still rivals, right? And Carthage is not happy that they lost Sicily, so they say, okay, we're going to try to expand more into Spain. Spain has a lot of things we would like. silver, copper, gold, lead, iron, right? Lots of resources. And Rome doesn't like that. They don't like them coming up, into Europe, and they don't like the expansion. And so they they encourage the Spanish to rebel against this outside invasion. And of course, Carthage isn't happy to hear that. So they task their best general, Hannibal. Hannibal sails from Carthage, right, their homeland, to Spain. Then he marches around all the way like through France. It was called Gaul back then. And they go over the Alps and finally into Italy. He takes 46,000 men and 37 elephants to intimidate the Romans. Unfortunately, along the journey, especially across the Alps, about half the soldiers and most of the elephants are killed. It was a combination of the cold and attacks from people along the way there. But they do end up going in, attacking into Italy, and the army's still pretty good, and so they are fighting, and they win. Hannibal wins the first battle of Cannae, and then that's in southern Italy, and then they're going on raiding some more in the country, and the Romans are trying to stop them, right, from attacking in the Italian countryside. So what they next do, they have Scipio, who is a Roman general, and he leads Hannibal away. What he does is he goes after Spain, he captures Spain, and then he goes and attacks Carthage itself. And Hannibal has no choice but then to return back home to defend his people in northern Africa. So Scipio ends up winning. That was called the Battle of Zama, and basically Carthage has to give up its navy and pay Rome, again, a large sum of money, and it had to give up the Spanish territory. So Rome is doing well, becomes basically the supreme power in the Western Mediterranean world. But they're still not done. They still think Carthage is a military threat, so they decide to finish them off in 146 BC. They finally do destroy Carthage completely in that Third Punic War. And at that same time, Rome is also going after other states in the Eastern Mediterranean, and eventually, all of Greece is going to fall to the Romans, and then they're even going to go into Asia. So there's a map here to kind of show you the expansion of the Roman Empire, and we will talk more about that next time.